Audrey Vance's laughter bounced off the glass walls of her corner office. At your age, Gerald, we need hungry young talent, not expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. She could not finish without another wave of laughter shaking her shoulders, her Harvard MBA degree gleaming on the wall behind her. I stood there frozen, clutching my portfolio of 18 years of achievements, watching this 37-year-old CEO dismiss everything I had built at Fortress Cloud Systems. She was wearing a designer dress that cost more than my first car and a platinum watch that ticked silently, counting down the seconds of my humiliation. The leather folder in my hands contained documentation of every major system I had architected and late night I had sacrificed while she collected massive bonuses. I am Gerald Miller, 58 years old, Director of Cloud Security. I had stayed loyal to this company for 18 years, watching 28-year-old engineers with half my experience get promoted because they understood buzzwords. My wife Helen calls me stubborn. My kids think I am from the Stone Age because I prefer email over Slack. But my so-called outdated approach had kept their cloud infrastructure running flawlessly. The cloud migration project I designed saved them $2.3 million annually. The threat detection algorithms I built, which monitored network packets and analyzed traffic spikes to detect anomalies, prevented 3 major breach attempts last year. Audrey waved her hand dismissively, leaning back in her ergonomic chair. Everyone is replaceable, Gerald. If you think you are worth more, try your luck elsewhere. Maybe it is time to think about early retirement. Golf courses are nice this time of year. I felt something crack inside. The foundation of 18 years of believing loyalty would be rewarded was shattered. I understand, I said quietly, collecting my portfolio. Through the glass, I could see my colleagues pretending not to watch, their heads buried in their monitors. Listen, Gerald, Audrey said in that artificial tone of concern managers learn in seminars. You are good, but you are expensive. The board sees a senior engineer pulling $140, zero when we can hire 2 fresh computer science graduates for that price. That is just business. Nothing personal, nothing personal. As if 18 years of my life was just a transaction. As if the nights I had stayed until midnight debugging systems while she was networking at wine tastings were not personal. As if missing my daughter's soccer games and my son's debate tournaments to keep this company running was not personal. That is when I knew exactly what I would do. If I was just a replaceable part, it was time to see how the machine operated without me. I walked back through the open office to my cubicle. My desk was wedged between 2 recent graduates who called me sir and asked why we could not just rewrite our legacy system over a weekend. Row after row of standing desks were filled with 25-year-olds in hoodies, typing frantically on MacBooks, building on systems I had architected before they learned to drive. These kids spent hours browsing social media, discussing tech influencers and the latest trends, but they had absolutely no understanding of how the underlying network protocols or packet routing worked. My computer screen displayed a flood of notifications, Slack messages from junior developers asking me to review their code, and calendar reminders for meetings where I would explain why certain approaches would not work. Next to my keyboard sat a photo of my family, Helen looking tired but smiling after her second round of chemotherapy. Chloe, my 20-year-old daughter, home from State University where tuition had just increased 12% for the 3rd year running. Brandon, my 18-year-old son, stressed about college applications. Healthcare premiums were eating 30% of my take-home pay. Helen's cancer treatments cost us $47,000 out of pocket last year, money we borrowed against the house. Chloe's education was draining our savings. Brandon was looking at engineering schools, costing $65,000 a year. And here I was being laughed at for asking for an 8% raise after 18 years of service. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small leather notebook. Inside were my personal projects, documented with dates, development notes, and implementation details. This was my intellectual playground. The notebook contained algorithms I had written on my home computer and security protocols I had refined in my garage lab on weekends. What Audrey never knew was that I had never signed over the rights to these personal innovations. The standard employment contract I signed 18 years ago covered work done during company time using company resources. But my most valuable creations lived in a legal gray area. Personal projects developed on my equipment during my own time. I pulled up my personal GitHub account on my phone, scrolling through repositories, hundreds of commits, thousands of lines of code, all time-stamped. The threat detection system that saved Fortress millions was originally developed as a weekend project to secure my home network. I had shared these innovations out of loyalty. Now, that loyalty was dead. I picked up my phone and called Julian Mercer, VP of Engineering at SyncCloud Solutions, Fortress's biggest competitor. Julian, this is Gerald Miller from Fortress. I think it is time we had that conversation. 4 hours later, I sat across from Julian Mercer at Alexander's Steakhouse in Palo Alto, a place that usually required reservations weeks in advance. Julian had made one phone call and gotten us a corner table with complete privacy. That told me everything I needed to know about SyncCloud's influence in Silicon Valley. Julian was in his early 50s, gray at the temples, but sharp-eyed, wearing a casual blazer over jeans. He did not wear a corporate uniform or a power tie. He looked like someone who had built systems with his own hands before he had learned to manage budgets. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm and professional. It was the handshake of someone who did not need to prove anything to anyone. "I have been following your work for years, Gerald," Julian said, studying me over his drink. "Or rather, I have been following the sudden leaps in Fortress Cloud Systems' security capabilities that mysteriously coincided with your project timelines. That predictive threat detection system you built for their Summit Bank contract was a masterpiece. My team tried to reverse engineer the approach for 6 months and could not crack it. I felt a knot in my stomach mixed with a sudden surge of pride. Someone had actually noticed. Someone understood the deep technical complexity of what I had spent nights building." "How did you know that system was mine?" I asked. Julian smiled. "Because Audrey Vance does not have the technical background to understand even the basics of machine learning algorithms, let alone architect them. I have seen her speak at tech conferences. She is great at buzzwords, but terrible at substance, and because innovation does not just happen by accident. Someone with deep expertise had to build those systems." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Plus, I have contacts throughout the industry. People talk. Your reputation among actual engineers is solid gold, even if your management does not seem to recognize it. Half the security professionals in Silicon Valley know your work, even if they have never met you." I took a sip of my beer, gathering my thoughts. The restaurant buzzed with conversations about venture capital and IPOs, the soundtrack of an industry that worshipped youth and disruption. Here I was, a 58-year-old engineer in a world that thought innovation stopped at 35. "What exactly are you offering?" I asked. "Senior Engineering Director position, oversight of our entire cloud security division," Julian said without hesitation. "Base salary is $420,000, full equity package that will vest over 4 years, and a team of 8 senior engineers. Average age on the team is 45. We believe experience creates better code than enthusiasm." My breath caught in my throat. $420,000. That was exactly triple my current salary at Fortress. It was enough to pay for Helen's cancer treatments without touching our retirement savings. It was enough to send both kids to engineering school without drowning them in student debt. It was enough to finally stop choosing between financial security and my family's urgent needs. "But more importantly," Julian continued, "we offer recognition, your name on the patents, credit for the innovations you create. We are not interested in non-technical managers taking credit for engineering breakthroughs." He paused, studying my expression. "And if you brought your personal innovations with you, theoretical systems you developed on your own time using your own resources, we have a proper intellectual property acquisition process. We pay fair market compensation for proven technology." Something flickered in Julian's eyes. Understanding, he had done his homework, knew about the legal gray areas that bigger companies often ignored. SyncCloud was not just offering me a job. They were offering to properly value intellectual property that Fortress had taken for granted for years. I pulled out my worn leather notebook and placed it on the wooden table between us. "I have Git commits and development documentation, proving these systems were personal projects," I said. "Fortress implemented them, but they never formally acquired the rights. Julian's eyes widened as he flipped through pages of algorithms, each entry dated and documented. Years of weekend work, personal passion projects that had become the backbone of Fortress's competitive advantage. "This is incredibly comprehensive," he said, his voice filled with respect. "How much of Fortress's security infrastructure is based on your personal work?" "About 60%, I said quietly. "The core threat detection algorithms, the cloud optimization frameworks, the automated response systems, all developed on my home lab before the company implemented them." Julian closed the notebook and met my eyes. "That is quite an oversight on their legal team's part. Audrey Vance does not value senior functions," I said, echoing the CEO's own dismissive attitude. "That includes legal. Apparently, she is too focused on hiring fresh graduates to worry about protecting existing assets." We spent the next 2 hours discussing technical details, team structures, and project timelines. Julian understood the complexity of enterprise-scale systems in a way that Audrey never had. He asked intelligent questions about scalability, security trade-offs, and implementation challenges. For the first time in years, I felt like I was talking to a peer who respected both my experience and my potential. By the time dessert arrived, we had outlined a transition plan that would bring my personal innovations to SyncCloud while staying within legal boundaries. Everything would be documented, transparent, and legally binding. The kind of agreement Audrey should have proposed years ago if she had valued long-term relationships over short-term savings. I agreed to sign their offer letter the following morning. When I went home that night and told Helen about the job offer, she broke down in tears. For the past 2 years since her diagnosis, a heavy cloud of financial anxiety had hung over our home. She had been worrying about the cost of her treatments, quietly suggesting we sell the house or that the kids skip university. The news that my experience had secured us a salary of $420,000, triple what I was making, felt like a sudden burst of sunlight. We sat at the kitchen table, holding hands, feeling the crushing weight of medical debt evaporate. Chloe and Brandon joined us, their eyes wide as I explained that their college educations were fully secure. My daughter would not have to work late shifts at the campus coffee shop, and my son could apply to any engineering school he dreamed of. That evening, for the first time in years, we laughed as a family without the shadow of cancer and bills looming over us. 2 weeks later, I placed my resignation letter on Audrey Vance's desk. She barely looked up from her MacBook. Her attention was split between email and a muted video conference. This was the multitasking that passed for leadership in her generation. She scanned the printed paper quickly, her expression indifferent. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice flat. I had considered crafting some vague story about early retirement, but the truth had more impact, and I was done protecting her feelings. SyncCloud Solutions, that got her attention. Her head snapped up from the screen, her eyes narrowing with the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in weeks. "Our biggest competitor," she said, her voice rising slightly. "That is extremely unfortunate timing. We are in final negotiations with Summit Bank to expand our security contract." "I know," I said simply. "I built the threat detection model that won us that initial contract." Audrey's expression shifted from surprise to concern, perhaps even a flash of panic. For the first time, she was calculating what my departure might actually cost the company in dollars. "We should discuss retention options immediately," she said, leaning forward. "Perhaps that raise you mentioned. We can offer a 15% increase plus a promotion to Vice President of Cloud Engineering." The offer was more than I had dared to ask for 2 weeks ago. If she had shown even a fraction of this flexibility then, none of this would have happened. But some doors, once closed, cannot be reopened with money alone. The damage to my trust was irreversible. "The offer from SyncCloud is $420,000, plus a significant equity package," I said calmly. "But more importantly, they value experience over age." Audrey laughed, but it sounded hollow now, lacking the confident superiority from our last meeting. "They are overpaying you by at least 100%. You will be disappointed when they realize a 58-year-old engineer cannot adapt to their modern development pace." I smiled, feeling a strange new confidence. "We will see who is disappointed," I said. "My last 2 weeks at Fortress were surreal." Suddenly, middle managers who had barely acknowledged me for years wanted to take me to lunch, pick my brain about projects, and understand systems they had ignored. They scrambled to document processes they had never bothered to learn, realizing too late that 18 years of institutional knowledge was walking out the door with the person who created it. I completed every transition document with professional thoroughness. I trained my replacement, a 26-year-old named Sean Cooper. Sean was eager but clearly terrified. He had a master's degree in computer science, but zero experience managing complex legacy architectures at scale. He asked basic questions about query execution paths and database transaction logs. I explained how my design prevented locking loops that no SQL system struggled with, but he looked lost. I did my best to guide him, but 18 years of experience cannot be downloaded during a 2-week transition. During those final days, I also made careful copies of every email where I had shared my personal projects with the company. I organized my Git commits and home server logs. I wanted an airtight evidence trail, proving that Fortress had implemented my personal innovations without ever securing the legal rights. I knew their legal department would eventually realize what they had lost, and I wanted to be prepared. I walked out of Fortress's glass headquarters for the last time at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday in March. I did not look back. By Monday morning, I was sitting in my new office at SyncCloud Solutions. Julian Mercer had kept every promise. My office was spacious, but the real prize was my team of 8 senior engineers. The oldest was 57, the youngest was 38. These were battle-tested professionals who understood that wisdom and energy were not mutually exclusive. They did not communicate in buzzwords. They spoke in clean architecture and solid principles. We spent my first week aligning our strategies. I explained how my predictive security framework could be integrated into SyncCloud's existing cloud infrastructure. Unlike the junior developers at Fortress, who wanted to rewrite everything in the newest framework, my team at SyncCloud immediately understood the value of my established algorithms. They saw how my neural networks could predict attack patterns before they materialized. We worked late, not out of fear or corporate pressure, but out of a shared passion for building something exceptional. For the first time in years, I felt respected, energized, and valued for the gray hair on my temples. We were about to show Silicon Valley what experienced engineers could do. 6 weeks after the first implementation of my predictive security framework went live at SyncCloud, the industry took notice. The algorithms that Audrey Vance had dismissed as outdated legacy thinking were now detecting network threats 72 hours before they could materialize. Processing speeds across our cloud infrastructure increased by 35%, and false positives dropped by 60%. Our sales team had hard data proving we could outperform Fortress Cloud Systems' best metrics by significant margins. The machine learning models I had trained on my home computer were predicting attack patterns with 94% accuracy. The threat detection system that had saved Fortress millions was now protecting SyncCloud's clients, with my name proudly displayed on every patent filing. For the first time in my career, my innovations belonged to me legally and professionally. The shockwave hit Fortress almost immediately. Summit Bank announced they were terminating their negotiations with Fortress and switching their entire cloud security contract to SyncCloud. The loss of that contract was a massive blow to Fortress's revenue. The sales team at SyncCloud used my performance metrics to win over 3 other major financial clients. My phone started ringing constantly. The first call was from a prominent tech publication wanting to interview the architect behind SyncCloud's security breakthrough. The second was from a venture capital firm interested in licensing our technology. The third call, and the 6 that followed, were from Audrey Vance. I let them all go to voicemail. I saved one message for posterity. "Gerald, this is Audrey. We need to discuss consulting opportunities immediately. Fortress is prepared to offer a substantial compensation package for your expertise. Please call me back as soon as possible." We made a mistake. The admission felt hollow. It was motivated by corporate panic rather than genuine recognition of my value. I did not return the call. 4 days later, Audrey was waiting beside my car in the SyncCloud parking garage at dusk. She looked entirely different. The polished, flawless CEO who had laughed at me was gone. She looked exhausted, her clothes slightly rumpled and dark circles under her eyes. The junior developers had attempted to deploy a major update that crashed their primary server for 4 hours, exposing major vulnerabilities. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and she knew it. "This is inappropriate, Audrey," I said, maintaining my distance. "You have put 180 jobs at risk, Gerald," she said, her voice urgent and desperate. She stepped closer, her hands trembling. "Fortress is facing an existential crisis because of the intellectual property you took. Our systems are buckling under the load, and we cannot patch the security vulnerabilities." Summit Bank's departure has triggered a panic among our other major clients. "I did not take anything that belonged to Fortress," I replied calmly, keeping my voice steady. "I took my personal intellectual property, code that I developed on my own time using my own hardware. Fortress used it for years without paying for it or securing the rights. Your legal team never did their due diligence, and you never valued experienced personnel enough to care about the details." Audrey stepped closer, desperation evident in her bloodshot eyes. She had clearly been working 18-hour days, trying to contain the fallout. "Name your price, Gerald. Whatever SyncCloud is paying you, we will double it, we will triple it. We will make you Chief Technology Officer, give you a seat on the board, and hand you whatever equity package you want. Just come back and fix the infrastructure before it collapses." I stood there looking at her and remembered the 16 years of sitting in a cubicle while she and other executives collected massive bonuses off the back of my labor. I thought about the morning she laughed in my face, dismissing me like a piece of obsolete hardware. I thought about Helen's medical bills and my children's educational dreams that her refusal had jeopardized. "You once told me that everyone is replaceable, Audrey," I said quietly. "You said that was just business, nothing personal. I am simply following your business philosophy. Good luck with the transition." I got into my car and drove away. As I turned on my headlights, they illuminated her standing there, a small, defeated figure in the dim concrete garage, clutching her designer handbag as if it could save her. The response from Fortress was swift and desperate. The following week, they filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against me in federal court. They accused me of theft of trade secrets, corporate espionage, and breach of fiduciary duty. They sought an emergency injunction to force me to surrender my algorithms and return to their servers. Audrey had convinced the board that a legal assault was their only hope of survival. They wanted to tie me up in litigation, bankrupted by legal fees, until I was forced to settle and give them my code. But they had underestimated my preparation, and they had underestimated Julian Mercer. SyncCloud's legal team immediately stepped in, providing a defense team of the top intellectual property lawyers in the country. The stage was set for a courtroom battle that would decide the fate of my life's work. The courtroom battle did not last as long as Fortress's board had hoped. In the federal district court, my legal team presented a mountain of irrefutable evidence. We produced the detailed Git commit history from my personal GitHub account, showing that the core threat detection algorithms had been written and tested on my home equipment years before Fortress implemented them. We submitted timestamped home server logs, proving that the development occurred on weekends and holidays. Most importantly, we presented the original employment agreement I had signed 18 years ago. The contract lacked any assignment clause for off-duty, independent intellectual property developed without company resources. Our lead counsel argued that Fortress's commercial use of my software constituted patent and copyright infringement under federal law, specifically citing Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 271. We showed that Fortress had integrated my personal property into their commercial products without my permission or proper compensation. The judge was blistering in her final ruling. She noted that Fortress had failed to perform basic legal due diligence and had arrogantly assumed ownership of an employee's private creations. She declared that the software belonged solely to me. She dismissed Fortress's claims with prejudice and ordered them to pay all of my legal fees, which had reached nearly $90,000. The judge added a stern warning that employers must respect the intellectual boundaries of independent creations. The legal defeat was the final blow for Fortress. Their stock price fell 47% in a single quarter. Major clients panicked, realizing that the company's core security systems were legally compromised. Under intense pressure from the board and institutional investors, Audrey Vance was forced to resign. Her replacement, an experienced executive in his mid-50s, immediately began restructuring the business. To cut costs, the company laid off 180 employees, targeting middle management and administration. While my victory was complete, it felt more complex than I had anticipated. One afternoon, 3 months after the lawsuit ended, I received a visitor at my SyncCloud office. It was Diane Foster, Fortress's former head of customer service. Diane had been with the company for 12 years. She was a single mother who had worked tirelessly and someone I had shared coffee and complaints with for over a decade. She sat across from my desk, looking tired and defeated. 180 people lost their jobs. Gerald, Diane said quietly, her voice trembling. People with mortgages, families, and kids in college. Was your revenge against Audrey worth destroying their livelihoods? Her question hit me harder than any legal threat. In my intense focus on Audrey's arrogance and my own desire for justice, I had underestimated the collateral damage. The rank-and-file employees had nothing to do with Audrey's ageism, yet they were the ones paying the price. You are right to be angry, Diane, I said. I have been thinking about that every day. That is why I spoke with Julianne Mercer and our board. SyncCloud has already hired 73 former Fortress employees in the last 4 months. And I want you to run our new customer relations division, bringing your entire team with you. We have the budget, and we need your experience. Diane's expression softened, the tension leaving her shoulders. She stared at me, a tear forming in her eye before nodding. Thank you, Gerald, she whispered. That meeting led to the creation of the Experience Matters initiative at SyncCloud. We partnered with industry retraining organizations to offer skills updates for engineers over 45. We established consulting arrangements for older professionals who wanted flexible hours. SyncCloud became the first major tech firm to explicitly ban age bias in hiring, and our application rates surged by 400%. Experienced professionals from across the country sought us out, eager to work for a company that valued wisdom. This initiative soon became a blueprint for other tech giants in the Silicon Valley, sparking a quiet revolution against age discrimination. 8 months after leaving Fortress, I stood at a podium in San Francisco to receive the Lifetime Achievement Award for Cloud Security Architecture. Holding the heavy glass trophy in my hands, I listened to the thunderous applause filling the auditorium. Looking out at the audience, I saw a mix of gray-haired veterans and young engineers sitting together. I thought about Audrey's comment about early retirement. She had been wrong about everything. We were not expensive legacy employees clinging to outdated approaches. We were battle-tested professionals who understood how to build systems that actually work. Today, my family is in a very different place. Helen is in full remission, her health stable, and the medical bills are completely paid off. Chloe is thriving at university, studying data science, while Brandon has just accepted an offer from a top engineering school. Both of them will graduate without a single dollar of student debt. Last week, Fortress Cloud Systems filed for bankruptcy, selling its remaining assets to a private equity firm. The company I helped build for 18 years was gone, dismantled by leaders who confused youth with competence. If you are an experienced professional facing managers who think your years make you obsolete, remember this: your knowledge is worth fighting for. Document your work, understand your legal rights, and never let anyone convince you that your best years are behind you. Because when experience finally gets angry enough to demand respect, the industry changes. The algorithms are still running, my name is on the patents, and the world is finally listening.